When you do something that's personal or, a long work of nonfiction, the first thing I had to do was like exercise and completely rid myself of all the magazine writing cliches, because it's just so different. You're always looking for the bon mot. You're always looking for the cute wording and a cool kicker, and also everything is really condensed. But you kind of train yourself to write in this like very fast moving, very slick, very fun, very condensed way, and you know your length in your head. Every paragraph needs some kind of reward for the reader. Here I was confronted by the fact that, like, okay, so what comes next? What turns the page? What is this narrative arc? Why would reader, stay with me for this journey?
Hey, I'm John.
I'm Corey,
And this is The Passage,
the podcast where authors break down their favorite pieces of writing
taking you behind the scenes from the first spark of inspiration
to the final edits and everything in between.
Anya Von Bremzen is a best-selling writer, cookbook author, memoirist, and multiple James Beard Foundation Award winner. She's the author of the Russian cookbook Please to the Table, The New Spanish Table, and Mastering the Art of Soviet Cooking. I first discovered Anya when a good friend recommended Mastering the Art of Soviet Cooking to me. It was either just before or just after I had married into a Russian family, essentially. It was during the height of the pandemic. My wife and I were stuck in Tbilisi, Georgia, which is its own sort of pre- and post-Soviet culinary universe. And my friend thought the book would be a good entry point into this rich but extremely complicated world, not only of Russian cuisine, but Soviet history, trauma, exile, and the post-Soviet experience. I read the book and I really loved it. I think I even messaged you, Anya, to say how much I enjoyed it. Of all the books about Russia and the Soviet Union that I've read in the years since, it's probably the one I think about most often. Maybe because it has one foot sort of firmly in the West and one foot in the East. I'm not exactly sure. Either way, it's definitely the one I recommend the most. Her latest book, National Dish, blends memoir, travel, and of course, incredible food writing to look at how food and national identities shape each other, and what so-called national dishes with their dubious origins, borrowings, and influences can tell us about those places, and maybe more interestingly about ourselves. Everything she writes is phenomenal and worth a read. Anya, it's very lovely to have you here today.
Thanks so much for having me on, and what a time in the world, huh?
You've picked a passage from your book, National Dish. Can you sort of set it up for us and tell listeners what they might need to know before you read it?
It's the epilogue, the very last part of the book, which I envisioned would be something completely different. And then Putin's full-scale invasion started of Ukraine, and that changed absolutely everything. And the book was almost going to print, so I had to just hastily compose something that I felt was both personal and politically important. And unfortunately, we're still 4 years down the line in that war, in many new wars. And so sadly, it still applies. On February 25, 2022, I woke up after a turbulent night checking news updates about Putin's invasion of Ukraine. And amid the shock and the bouts of crying and adrenalized doomscrolling, a seemingly trivial yet intimately unsettling thought entered my mind. I realized that after all these years of investigating national cuisines and identities, I no longer knew how to think or talk about borsch, a beet soup that both Ukraine and Russia claimed as their own. I grew up in Soviet Moscow, eating borsch at least twice a week. For better or for worse, it always signified for me the despotic, difficult home we had left. Here in Queens, a big pot of my mom's borsch sat in my fridge. But who did have the right to claim it as heritage? That tangled question of cultural ownership I've been reflecting on for so long had landed on my own table with an intensity that suddenly felt viscerally, searingly personal. Back in Moscow, at the height of Brezhnev's stagnation, I never regarded borsch as any people's national dish. It was just there, a piece of our shared Soviet reality, like the brown winter snow or the buses filled with hangover breath or my scratchy wool school uniform. Our socialist borsch came in different guises. Institutional borsch, with its reek of stale cabbage, was to be endured indistinguishably at kindergartens, hospitals, and workers' canteens across the 11 time zones of our vast union of the socialist republics. Personal borsch, on the other hand, brought out every Soviet mom's and grandmother's sweet ingenuity, although to me, honestly, it all tasted kind of the same in the end. My mom was inordinately proud of her super quick vegetarian version. I still have the image of her in our trim Moscow kitchen, phone tucked under her chin, shredding the carrots, cabbage, and beets on a clunky box grater right into our chipped enamel family pot. It was her recipe, she always insisted. A miracle of shortage economy conjured from a can of tomato paste and some withered root vegetables. In the fall, she'd add a tart Antonovka apple. In the winter, maybe a glob of alien American ketchup for a piquant, faintly dissident, not-Soviet touch. I never had the heart to tell her that I prefer her make-believe pot au feu or her cold borsch that came with the dacha season, a salad inside a magenta chilled liquid, alive with the cucumber, scallion, reddish crunch of the fleeting, short northern summer.
Anya, I really love that. There are so many details, even though I've never been to that part of the world, that immediately take me there. The one that immediately stuck out to me was just the buses filled with hangover breath. For some reason, that's such a surprising phrase, but is so immediately evocative. I know that you touched on this a little bit when you were setting up the piece, but it sounds like this was a very late addition to the book. At what point did you sort of realize, okay, the book that I thought was done is no longer done, and it really needs this additional section?
Well, I think after the full-scale invasion started and I finished all the other chapters, and all the other chapters about me essentially being very skeptical about nationalism, about deconstructing the whole idea of a national dish, of that one country can claim hummus and not the other, because as I argued, a lot of these borders are kind of late additions and they're results of imperial carve-ups, where the reality of a national cuisine was something completely different. And suddenly the war starts, the full-scale invasion, rather, the war started in 2014, and there's all these disputes as the epilogue goes on about borsch, and Russia is taunting Ukraine even in 2019 before the full-scale invasion that, how could they claim it's our dish, and Ukrainians are responding with indignation. But nationalism has a different existential meaning in wartime. So it was the first time in my entire book project where I kind of sided with the people, with the Ukrainians who wanted to claim borsch. My original idea was to have an epilogue about Thanksgiving under the 7 train in my multicultural neighborhood in Queens, where there are 168 languages, and to see how all these different ethnicities interpret this American holiday, which is not benevolent either, obviously. So I was going to, deconstruct Thanksgiving and just look at the kind of multicultural reality, which I feel very much a part of as being an exile who has a house in Istanbul. But then, then the war happened and things suddenly changed very drastically about also my own identity. I kind of, throughout the book, I say that I felt very comfortable with my rootless cosmopolitanism, that I didn't need to have a home, that here I'm this multicultural, multilingual person inhabiting this very new reality of the world, like so many other people. And suddenly, with the Putin's full-scale invasion, I felt that I lost my connection to Russia, that I hated Russia more than ever, and that I couldn't visit Moscow even to visit the graves of my father and younger brother, who died during the pandemic. So I suddenly felt very rootless and very homeless for the first time in my life.
Morally and ethically, I get the sense that you knew immediately that the epilogue you had originally envisioned was not the right one, or the one that at least felt true to you for the end of the book. From a technical perspective, had you already written the Thanksgiving epilogue, and was it easy from a sort of writing perspective to draft this new epilogue, or did you really have to think a lot about, I have all of these feelings, this is sort of happening in real time and I'm trying to process it, how can I get it down in the page that feels like something polished and ready to be published?
No, fortunately, I didn't have the Thanksgiving epilogue because I think it was the wrong time of the year. So I was waiting for Thanksgiving. If I had written it, I don't know if I would have changed it. I'm very lazy. Once I write something and I like it, I'm not, it stays. And the epilogue was shorter. The other chapters in the book are sometimes 12,000 words, very long. This was about 4,000 or 5,000 words, and it came out kind of easily. I mean, the epilogue goes on with me talking to Ukrainians in Lviv about borsch and about my mother's feelings about it, which are very complex. And then it ends with us inviting Russian, Jewish, Soviet, Ukrainian friends, friends from Kiev, to a borsch and us discussing the war. And so it was rather spontaneous. As I read the passage, I look at the writing and I'm like, oh, maybe I would have written it, stylistically slightly different, because often one looks at one's own writing and thinks, well, it's actually hard to read. It's so jumbled. Like, why are the sentences so long? I'm a very technical writer because I used to be a concert pianist, and I understand very well that, like, you might have a lot of emotions in your sound, and it sounds like very passionate, but behind that passion, there's always technique, and there's always like repeating the passage over and over and over. And it's the same for me with writing. Something can come out as spontaneous and touching and poignant, but I literally just work over every word over and over. This was more of a quickly written because the book had to be put to bed. But it conveys what it had to convey.
Why did you choose this passage, Anya?
There were just 4 years of war with Ukraine last month in February, and because we're in another war, and because food at a time of war, acquires this like grave existential importance. My new book I'm working on is about bread. And when supply lines are cut off, your grain, doesn't grow. And food can be something benevolent and something that unites us. And that's a trope and that's a cliche. But at a time like this, it can be also something that divides us. So like two countries claiming the same dish as their own. And food is so prominent right now because of social media. It's in everyone's mind. And I think it's always a good place to talk about not just peace and not just hospitality, but about war.
Had you thought about writing about borsch before this situation presented itself, where you had to come up with something that felt, true to the times?
No, the way the book is set up, it's a travelogue, and it takes me to 6 cities across the world where I spent a month researching and talking to people. So going to Ukraine or Russia was not part of my plan, although maybe it should have been. But I was originally thinking of having something on hummus, which is kind of a similar situation, that is appropriated by Israel, claimed by so many other places, but we have to remember that before the 20th century, these countries that we know did not have the same borders. But there was another complication with that project. I was finishing it during the pandemic. So originally I was thinking I'd have 12 chapters, and it ended up being only 6 and longer ones because we couldn't travel. So like all these disruptions, all this, it just shows you how world events affect our work, especially if it's kind of journalistic and reportorial work, right?
How long was it in between? Because I get the sense that you suddenly sort of felt, okay, I need a new epilogue or a new idea for an epilogue, and it needs to touch on what's happening right now. So what was your sort of creative process that got you from, I need some sort of a hook that weaves into the book, and like getting from Putin's invasion of Ukraine to borsch?
Well, the passage that I just read is very accurate. I mean, sometimes you kind of construct things, but this was what was happening. And as the epilogue goes on, I explain that during pandemic, my mom, who was 88 at the time and very depressed because of Trump and because pandemic, she started teaching for this amazing organization called the League of Kitchens, where they collect, essentially ethnic grandmas teach their own dishes. Except it was a pandemic, so she had to learn Zoom at her age. And she really sprung back to life. And it really kind of just brought her so much joy. And one of the dishes she was teaching as a Russian instructor was borsch. And they started getting angry letters from Ukrainians. And that was even before the full-scale invasion, saying, why are you saying borsch is Russian? And how can you do this? And blah, 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 blah. And my mom was very troubled by this. She said, this is our dish, it's my personal recipe. We all cooked it. It belonged to kind of like a collective past. And my mom is very anti-Soviet and very anti-imperialist, very anti-Putin, but she still was very upset about this. And then after the invasion started, she kind of reconsidered, and I reconsidered. And, the epilogue goes through this complicated process of what we went through emotionally. And she started raising a lot of money for Ukraine through League of Kitchens by cooking borsch. So it was in a way of us reconsidering our own identity, because my mom was born in Ukraine in a Russian-speaking Jewish family. And a lot of our friends, immigrant friends who were also born in Ukraine, who culturally consider themselves Russian, they reconsidered. Our friends in Ukraine and Odessa, which was always a Russian-speaking city, also reconsidered. So it just kind of showed you in real time all the stuff that I was talking about formations of identities, about national dishes. Suddenly this was like accelerated real-time issue. So I didn't really think about whether I should include it or not. It happened, and it borsch was actually at the center of it and our discussions and arguments. So it was like a very natural and very personal, because I talk about pizza and pasta and ramen and tapas and the meze in Ottoman Istanbul. None of these are really personal. I mean, I talk about them as a journalist sitting there in the city and doing the reporting. This suddenly, as I said in the passage I just read, that issue that I've been thinking about for 4 years working on this book, it lands on my own dinner table with this explosive force, and it just kind of brings about all these reassessments and emotions.
If I hadn't have known the behind the scenes of how it was written and that it wasn't originally intended for the end, I think I honestly would have thought that it was planned from the beginning, that you sort of culminate both by bringing it home in the sense of talking about your own food and to sort of current events. So it's very interesting and, well, I don't want to say a happy circumstance given everything that was going on, but it feels like it was the natural way that you might end the book.
I say somewhere down the line that it's really an epilogue I wish I didn't have to write, and I would give anything not to write it. And I would give anything for the war not to happen. So, in a way, it was a spontaneous event. I mean, I could not have planned it. And without the war and without the kind of heightened sense of identity with Ukrainians and associating it with the dish, there was really no... I looked before the full-scale invasion, because the dispute over borsch began like in 2019, and they petitioned UNESCO to give it a intangible cultural heritage status. But I thought, it's just like another nationalist squabble about a dish, and, whatever. I didn't want to go there because, as I said, I've grown very critical of this kind of nation branding food exercises. My whole point is more universalist, that food is kind of fluid and seeps across borders, and to claim cultural ownership of a dish is not necessarily a good thing, because there's a lot of money involved, there's a lot of marketing involved, it all kind of gets tied up with this neoliberal logic where everything is a commodity in a way. But again, this happened, and it really kind of made me reconsider a lot of things, and it made me understand what happens to nationalist sentiments when there's a war.
Anya, you talk about it being a very late edition. How late are we talking? Was the book getting ready to be typeset or going to press? How long did you have to write this new epilogue?
I don't remember, honestly. A couple of months maybe. I still needed an epilogue. It's not like what you suggested. I had another one and I had to replace it. Mm-hmm. And if it was to be about Thanksgiving, I guess I was waiting for a certain date. Or maybe I did the report. No, I did the reporting. Because the war happened in February. The previous Thanksgiving, I went around, all these ethnic communities talking to them about Thanksgiving, which was funny because they were all trashing the food. They're like, oh, yeah, great holiday, hate the turkey, that kind of thing. And I was trying to think what to do with it. Yeah, I think the final manuscript, it came out in June 23, So it had to be put to bed probably August 22.
Was there a discussion with your editor about it, about the evolution of the end of the book, or was this a decision that you purely
No,
made
I
on
mean
your
he
own?
suggested it, and it in a way. I mean, I hate to even suggest that I somehow benefited or capitalized on the war, but in terms of having discussions like on podcasts and whatever, it obviously made it more current events. It made me. It made it topical. That epilogue, the entire epilogue, was excerpted by The Guardian, long reads on the day of publication. So yeah, it just, as I say, it just brought home the whole problematic of national food and identity in this very visceral and very immediate way that was happening in real time.
Prior to the invasion, had you thought about how to do that more directly in the book? Was that something in your mind, like how do I make this a little bit more personal, or?
Not really. No. For some reason, because it involved spending a month in a place, I really didn't want to go to Russia or Ukraine. I was more like I really wanted to do hummus as an example of this kind of war zone, claiming of national dishes. But then again, don't forget, everything got scrambled by the pandemic. Like I had one idea for the book, and it turned out to be something completely different, because for like a year and a half, just as I was 2/3 of the way through, we couldn't travel.
But I mean, Mastering the Art of Soviet Cooking is a kind of intensely personal book. Was there a conscious decision with this one to, be more of a reporter, be more of an outside observer?
Yeah, I didn't want to repeat the same tropes. I felt like I did the personal book. I mean, all this stuff is personal because I've been traveling and writing about food for so many years. So it's really part of who I am and what I do. It just, the dishes weren't necessarily personal. And I really felt, I mean, I wrote about borsch in Mastering the Art of Soviet Cooking. I think that's why one of the reasons I didn't want to repeat the same thing, because it would be like lazy reporting, right? To just revisit what you've just published.
How quickly did you write the epilogue? And how did the speed compare to what you normally would do?
Well, it was shorter than the other chapters. So like a chapter of like 12,000 words, maybe it takes me like a couple of months, depending on the reporting. Sometimes it just comes out. Yeah. The Soviet book, I did the whole thing in 18 months. This book I'm working on now, for instance, on bread, probably will take like 4 or 5 years because there's so much, so many travel logistics, meeting people. Like when something comes out of your head, you can just sit and write it, right? When you have to report it, and then the reporting doesn't check out, and the source that you thought would be great, it turns out to be a dud. So you're really like at the mercy. The epilogue, I don't know, maybe 3 weeks, 2-3 weeks.
Thinking about your entire process, I get the sense that the reporting, even logistics of sort of travel, but then also the hard work of gathering facts, interviews, etc., that takes up the vast majority of the time that it takes to create the book. Is the writing process a much smaller portion of that time?
Depends on the reporting. If everything goes well, and if you just get everything you want, and it's an ideal scenario. Like there's a chapter in National Dish about Naples and pizza and pasta, and I just had such great characters, and they just gave such great quotes. Like if the characters do the work for you in this kind of book, it makes it much easier. Now I'm writing something on Germany in my bread book, and I thought I had amazing reporting, and then I just listened to all the tapes, and they all say the same thing, and I'm like, what am I going to do? I'm not a fast writer. I mean, some writers, like my ex-boyfriend, he could write such like perfect prose. Mellifluous, perfect prose in like just as he was typing. I'm slow. Depends on the reporting and depends on the writing, but usually like it takes me 2 weeks to report. It will take me 2 months to write, or to a certain length. Again, my chapters in the bread book are very long as well, which is kind of a curse. I don't know why I put myself through this.
How did you learn how to do the kind of writing you do? You said you were a concert pianist. I know you studied piano. Where do you make the leap to writing? And I mean, you do, like you said, a sort of very technical kind of writing and reporting. How did you learn how to do that?
It sort of came gradually because I had a hand injury, and then I started writing cookbooks with my ex, who I just mentioned, who was like the writer in the family. So he helped me a lot with the writing. Well, in a cookbook style. And then I got a gig, amazing job at Travel and Leisure to be their food correspondent, which I did for almost 20 years. So for about 2 decades, I did this very slick, very fun, kind of travel journalism, which was like smart and fun. And, I thought well written, it really trains you to kind of do a lot of slick sentence work in a short space. And then my agent and my current boyfriend, who was also a writer, they were saying, why don't you do something more serious? Why are you doing this kind of glossy journalism all the time? Like, you could do better. And, honestly, I had no intention of leaving it. It was really fun. But then I put together the proposal for the Soviet book, and it sold at an auction for, a very large advance, and it was just suddenly, I guess I'm a writer. I have to do that was my first long form nonfiction book, because previously you don't write anything longer than 3,000 words, 5,000 words. I don't think I've ever done anything longer than 5,000 words. And also when you do something that's personal or, a long work of nonfiction, the first thing I had to do was exercise and completely rid myself of all the magazine writing cliches, because it's just so different.
Like what? Can you give an example? I think it's really fascinating that you've had sort of two parallel careers. One that is very, like you said, sort of glossy, and it has a lot of conventions that you have to think about and stick to. And then this sort of long form nonfiction format, which if you didn't know about the other part of your career would seem so natural. I mean, I read Mastering the Art of Soviet Cooking without knowing that about you. And I would never have thought that that was not something you had been doing for a long time. I mean, it really reads naturally. Can you talk about the difference between those two styles and how you broke out of that one?
Well, the thing with journalism, with that kind of glossy travel journalism, I don't mean like investigative reporting. You're always looking for the bon mot. You're always looking for the, cute wording and a cool kicker, and also everything is really condensed. And this kind of writing, you can spend 1,500 words just doing the setup, if that's what you feel you need to do.
Did you feel limited by it? Did you think like, God, I wish I could spend another 1,000 words on this?
Yeah, in journalism, sure, but you kind of train yourself to write to write in this very fast moving, very slick, very fun, very condensed way, and kind of your length in your head, and basically with that kind of writing, every paragraph needs some kind of reward for the reader, like a cool phrase or a cool image. With longer form writing, not necessarily. The longer term writing is this kind of writing, the travel writing about restaurants essentially, is not narrative. You just go to a restaurant, you describe, it's descriptive.
Yeah.
Here I was confronted by the fact that okay, so what comes next? What turns the page? What is this narrative arc? Why would reader, stay with me for this journey? And what is the journey? So I started doing storyboards, and because it's fragmented, all my work is consists of historical pullbacks and my personal stuff, like National Dish does, this bread book does, right? So you kind of just, you develop a rhythm between the pullback, the historic, and you kind of understand in your mind what the reader can sustain, and in terms of absorbing the history. But with the Soviet book, it wasn't really such a difficult task, because it's kind of slightly written in that accented, almost translated kind of style. It reads like a foreigner wrote it. So I had a lot of tropes in my mind. A lot of it has to deals with Sovietese, the kind of fossilized language and the ironic. So once you establish the voice and the tonality, the voice takes you a very long way. And the voice for this book, with National Dish, it was really harder, because I suddenly didn't have my Soviet voice anymore, and I had to reinvent who I was as a writer in a way. But with the Soviet book, it was in my head, like some immigrant, humorist writers like Steingart, Gerst. I mean, they write like this, it's like this always ironic, sarcastic kind of thing, and it puts a distance between you and the reality, and you can describe things that are horrible in ways that are not earnest.
Yeah.
Whereas with the epilogue I just read, you could not be You could not use an ironic tone, right? Because something horrible is happening.
With each of the most recent books, it seems like you're exploring a pretty different kind of writing, and you're very self-aware that, hey, the skills that I might have picked up or that I was deploying in the previous book, they're not going to apply here. I'm going to have to reinvent myself a little bit or reinvent my writing style. When you're first getting started with those drafts, is it difficult? Does it take you a while to break out of the previous habits or the previous way that you were writing to find something new?
Well, the transition from a Soviet book to National Dish was about a certain reality and written in a certain tonality, and I didn't have that to play with, that linguistic kind of soundscape. No, and now you just start. I kind of have the fear of the void, a fear of the blank page. So I just kind of start with something, just so I'm writing every day. So I don't go into writer's block. And now with AI, it's just so much easier in a way. You just like, if you have that kind of dry spell, you just feed them your notes, and it will spit out some horrible draft. But at least you have a horrible draft that you can depart from. It's odd. And from National Dish to the Bread Book, I mean, it's very similar writing, but just, the material kind of dictates the voice very often. It's the voices of the people you interview. So usually, like, after about 10,000 words, you kind of see where your voice is in this particular project. And with me, it's hard with these books I do because there are different countries and different realities, and sometimes the voice changes from chapter to chapter. And if you can see it, it's fine. But if the reader can see it, maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's not a good thing. And with National Dish, because it got so delayed because of the pandemic, that kind of happened.
Were you surprised to discover you had a knack for writing, or was it something you had always done?
No, I was completely surprised. Even after I was doing journalism, and I mean, I thought I was doing it really well, and I won awards, and the editors liked my work, and it was fun to read. Sometimes I go back at these, I look back at my magazine writing, and I'm going like, my God, I could never write anything like this now, because I just lost that condensed ability. Because it's a kind of muscle. You practice it. You have your funny phrases and your little ironies and whatever. It's just. It doesn't stay with you, at least with me. But no, I never thought I had a knack for writing. And honestly, if I didn't have to do it for money, I would never do it. I hate it.
You alluded to this a little bit earlier, but I'd love to know just about your daily writing process.
Wait. Sorry, Corey. Anya, what do you hate about it?
Just about everything, honestly. I mean, it's not as hard as playing piano. So it still feels like a breeze, But I mean, again, to me, everything is very technical. I don't see it as just, let's have some fun with it. Maybe I should. So I work really hard at every sentence. And not being a native speaker, even though I came here as a teenager, doesn't really help because I don't have natural idioms often in my mind. And I don't like writing in English. I don't like English that much generally. No, I don't know. It's not like I'm in pain every day and I just I'm full of hatred every single moment I do it. No, I mean, it can be, it's something engaging for me, and I work really hard to produce intellectually rigorous work because I want to be respected. It was interesting. I went to CUNY graduate school. A professor invited to lecture me to graduate students, to PhD students about National Dish. It was a class about language. And some, they were like PhD students in comp lit. And they said, well, we could tell you read a lot of theory and you read a lot of academic work. It shows in your writing in this easy way. And it felt so rewarding. I'm like, okay, I worked so hard. And but it's really important to me that the work has intellectual integrity, even though it's slightly presented and it's accessible to general reader. And that takes a lot of work. I mean, sometimes I read 2-3 dissertations a day for all these books. And I like researching. I like chasing that information. But because I hand myself into this long format chapters, with a lot of historical stuff. It's just hard.
Yeah, 12,000 words is really long for a chapter.
Yeah.
What do you like about writing?
When it turns out well, to read it like 2 years later and say, wow, I'm a smart person. It's, there's a gratification, but only for me, only on that level. I weirdly, because I was a pianist, I weirdly like typing out things and seeing it, and doing it on the computer and like trying out different versions. You know what? I'm a really good editor. You can give me like a really messy 30,000 word piece, and I will just instantly have a way of like rearranging it, and I'll have all the thoughts about it. So I like that part of, once I have a draft, a workable draft, I put it away for a couple of weeks, then I print it all out, and then I just like tear into it, and it's always fun for me. And like my boyfriend is a writer, he's a fiction writer, and he doesn't let me touch his fiction, but his nonfiction I always tear into, and he edits mine, and we discuss technical issues, and it's nice.
Anya, so the last question that we always ask every person that comes on the podcast before we get to rapid fire is, if you could hear any author or writer talk about their writing process, their creative process, how they write, who would you most want to hear from?
I like Kapuscinski, the travel writer. I'm kind of obsessed with it. I'm reading Shah of Shahs, and apparently he made up a lot of stuff. So I would have a lot of questions.
Interesting.
All right. We'll do some rapid fire. These are not long answers. You can just give us the first thing that comes to your mind. What's one aspect of writing you think you're really good at?
Editing.
What's one aspect of writing you think you're bad at?
Putting down the first draft.
What's harder to write, the first line or the last line?
The first line.
What's the perfect number of drafts?
For me, one, but it never happens that way.
What's the first thing you edit out of a draft?
Length.
What's the optimum number of pages for a book?
We don't think in pages, we think in words. 100,000. Probably that's like 350 pages, I don't know.
What's a word you always misspell and autocorrect saves you?
Prosciutto.
Do you write longhand, Google Doc, Word, something else?
Word.
Music, TV, podcasts in the background, or just
Never.
silence? Nothing.
Silence.
Finally, what's your go-to procrastination method?
Research.
Love it. Anya, thank you so much for being on the podcast. We really enjoyed speaking with you.
It was so much fun. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks, Anya.